Hey everyone, I am here for the weekly PerfBits. And what better to be a PerfBit than to be a plural PerfBits? And I have my colleague, Leandro Melendez, who's on
Hola,
that side.
Beats. What side are we?
You're on that side.
Hola.
Hola.
Touch
Hola.
half the screen.
Hola, amigo. Leandro, how was your week?
Crazy, but good. It's Friday. I'm so happy. PerfBits Friday. Happier even.
Exactly. And there is somewhere in here I can look at the chat. If anyone is actually, just for fun, going to chat us some stuff, you can do that. But Leandro, as you've been watching PerfBits, now we're actually two PerfBit together, which is 2 bits, which is 25 cents in America, in US currency. We usually say hello to everyone and welcome to you made it through the end of the week. And I had, before I say anything, I know tons of people in the performance and IT community in Ukraine. So I'm really hopeful that everything stops and comes to an end I'm not necessarily supportive of anyone being a warmonger, let alone an entire country invading another country. So my thoughts and prayers go out to the folks in Ukraine and the entire area, because this is horrible. Anyway.
Yeah. Whoever of the amigos that are over there, hopefully you made it out on time. If not, stay safe, hopefully. I mean, it's hard to ask at times, but best of lucks, best of wishes.
Yes. I hope it comes to an end as soon as it possibly can. But also, on a lighter note, I want to give a shout out to the Microsoft Authenticator application, which through all of my frustration today, trying to get my VPN to work with the prompt, to get connections through a remote desktop gateway, all of this, turns out none of the problems were the Authenticator app. It was everything else. Everything else sucked, but props to the Authenticator app. So Leandro, did you have any software engineers you wanted to give a shout out to for the week?
Well, to start off with your comment on the Authenticator, and is needed a lot of security, but sometimes that much security can be painful on a daily basis.
Painful.
Yeah. But shoutouts, lots of shoutouts. I mean, this week we had a presentation with the Performance en Español community. We talked with the amigo Delvis Echeverria. We had a little bit of good presentation. People joined, had very good questions on how to turn your agile teams into performance, and some radical things that I've been saying lately about performance testing that is scandalizing more than one.
Cool.
But it was a good talk. Shout out to the amigo Delvis. Thanks for helping with that movement, having and distributing the knowledge. We had on Tuesday as well the Ask Me Anything for PerfBits.
Yeah.
Had lots of fun. Shout out to the friend Lloyd Watts. We had an
Lloyd was great. Lloyd on LinkedIn. Lloyd did this fantastic, just a bunch of response. I've never had that much feedback from one thing. So, and he's done some great research there. So thank you, Lloyd, for that. That was
lots of hi to him, and again, apologies if anything of what I said was sounded weird. But I am looking for his article. I hope it's going to be a good read for this weekend, and I can do better informed opinions next time.
And then, of course, we give a shout out to our sponsors. So a special thanks to our friends at Tricentis, NeoLoad, and Flood.io, who are tools that we knew before Tricentis came along and picked them up. So a shout out to everyone in the NeoLoad world. There is a new version of NeoLoad coming. I think I saw there's some major release coming. So we'll see what's getting integrated there. And there's some other stuff that Scott had talked about happening in the Tricentis performance world. So there's good stuff happening. So shout out, thank you and a support to Tricentis for their support of PerfBits. And of course, Ryan Folk Consulting. Always happy to have some expertise. If you can't get a guy like Leandro or a guy like me to come help you, just casually on a chat session somewhere, you probably need to pay a real person to come and be a guru and come live with you. And that's Ryan's guys. It's fantastic. So really smart consulting with a tremendous amount of experience there. So Folk Consulting, thank you very much. And of course, Catchpoint APM. Now I keep giving shout outs, Leandro, because Henry and Tim and a bunch of really, really capable engineers are working on the web page test part of the Catchpoint APM story. So have you used web page test before? I mean, it's
no, so they have not played around it.
It's an amazing tool, and they've done some amazing updates recently. So if you haven't checked out the latest version of web page test and following those guys on social media, they're sharing their knowledge as well. So shout out to them, and thanks for your support of PerfBits. Look forward also to Federico and Sophie and Roger. We're going to do some interesting things with Abstracta. And thanks again, Leandro, for introducing me more closely with them, because I've been doing a little homework before we have some new episodes coming with them. So that should be fun.
Yeah. More of our amigos joining the movement and support of PerfBits. We'll be talking about them. And hola, Fede, if you're there. It's such a pleasure to start working here.
Yeah, very cool. All right. So, Leandro, the thing that you and I talked about this week in terms of like the getting to Friday, I had a meeting with like my architects group, and I'm in a small company that's like less than 200 people. I mean, it's a startup of like minuscule startup size, and they sort of invited me to, hey, we hired some new people. The architects team is growing, and the architects are testers, developers, developer engineers. Testers at our company are software developers and testers, more developers and testers to some extent. I've been like the only performance load testing person at the whole company just because we're so small. But the name of the meeting was, Mark's Performance World. And so it was just to ask me anything, kind of show me around the place. It was like Cribs. Like if you remember MTV Cribs, where like some famous person would come show you around their house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the same thing, but I'm like showing them around. Well, here's how I use JMeter, and over here I've got my run deck running. And we got some APM tools. We got a collection of 3 different APM tools, and oh yeah, we got these totally dope scripts, and then we got some test data. And I'm not that cool. It's much nerdier than that. But that was a lot of the conversation moved towards shifting left and what can we do from a lot of the testing I do is driven by sort of strategic architectural changes, internals of the platform for, say, asynchronous programming or for database logging, changing how we do all sorts of logging, and coming up with sort of the question from the senior developers are always, is this thing even going to work? Should we even try to create a new way of doing, like a new pattern for development? And this was the first time having a much more, I think, a more comprehensive conversation with this team on shouldn't we formalize how we do that architectural research and then drive it back into everyday engineering. And you had said also that with your recent move to K6, you're also getting in touch more with how developers think about performance testing. What is your recent experience, or are there any aha moments that you're having recently?
Well, and I would say it's not so recent experience. In part, is influenced my joining of K6. This philosophy of enabling developers to start thinking and working around performance is something that from before I started to feel those pains or those delays of a developer team in our agile and continuous teams that were throwing finished software at us to start developing scripts, automations, our JMeters, our neoloads that we were using in the last project that I was working on. And it started, they started to generate pressure on us. We were pushing back like, dude, it's Thursday, the second week of the sprint. Give us a break while you're just delivering this.
Yeah.
And got me thinking that there are so many disadvantages of that handover, of that process, losing time, the as you say, you are the only performance something guy in the team that is purely performance. Maybe the developers have a notion, but they are in no way the expert level that you have. So it's in that shifting left effort, and as well thinking a little over the automation pyramid and over who is creating those codes, who's creating those things that we're going to automate and test in the end, who knows it better. So who may be more efficient at creating some of those automations, some of those executions. If we give them the right tools, the right processes, it's not, and again, working for a tool vendor company, but you always have to choose a tool that fits the best your team. There are variations, and something may be tastier for you or fit better into your process and be easier to roll to your developers. Hey, these Jenkins with, or in your case, Rundeck, you just configure this cycle repeating, and then you can easily create your own script. If you want to just use, let's say, Postman, you can put a Postman in a Rundeck that starts testing your services and reporting some response time. Quick and easy. And if the developers start thinking on that, they know how to call the service, they know how it works, the requirements. Instead of us trying to hack the system and, hey, what is the authentication that I had to do for this process so that I can call the service? Well, you know it better, just do it. And even before that, we can come with the developer and tell them, before you create code, as the performance person, expert, whatever you want to call it, you should be careful with this. I'm calling it PDD, performance-driven development, where from the beginning you tell them, make sure that you have these little animations or this instrumentation for, I don't know, number of connections to the database, size of the return, the payloads. Do not exceed these type of things, or make sure that the response time always have some sort of response time, and try to keep them in line. And instead of having this handover, let them do it. They are the best ones. They have the knowledge of the application, of the code, of everything there.
Yeah. I think, Leandro, to that point, certain members of my development engineering team are incredibly capable engineers from a performance perspective. I mean, I'm humbled by some of the programming techniques and the patterns that these guys are aware of. Even in the database world as well, we're an incredibly complex or challenging scalability vector for SQL Server, and we have some really great, unique partitioning stuff. So one of the tips I have is, when you're, like in my case, or you're the performance consultant, or these are your customers internally, you're a performance engineer or performance tester on the team, think about level 1, level 2, level 3 in terms of, does this developer really understand kind of performance? Do they know code, but do they understand how a system runs code? So do they understand runtimes and resources and stuff? And along with their aptitude, let's say level 1, level low, medium, high, if you have somebody with really high aptitude, meaning I really get this, can you support them with a level of interest? Can you encourage them, their enthusiasm about it? And that changes how you collaborate with your development staff, and meet them at their level, right? And in some cases, there's people with more aptitude than even me. I'm like, I know a little bit about task-based programming, enough to know how to load test it, how to test for its efficiency and find bugs. But I've never written what these guys have written. I mean, they're doing some amazing, intelligent work in there. So there's something humbling about working with development for me, because I never got a computer science degree or anything like that. Like, I know how a compiler sort of works, but I've never written one. And I may have a lot of experience, but I'm always humbled by somebody that can come complete greenfield and invent like a system of code that does things in microseconds. I mean, it's amazing. So that's one thing, is to figure out, how can I help? Do they need the boring, painful parts of load testing automated so that they can stay focused on their development and get the feedback they need, but they don't have to become a master of the load testing tool. They don't have to be a genius when it comes to graphing or profiling and all this other stuff. You can automate a lot of those everyday kinds of things in the load testing process. So try to figure out what would be most helpful to them. Hey, what would you guys like to learn every day? That was part of our conversation as well. Like, I can figure out how to present the right numbers on a graph, but what numbers are the most interesting or valuable at that point in the life cycle?
And for the two elements, but more valuable for the developer, for whatever is the goal of the software, what numbers are important, or the business, or us, the performance perspective. And it's something really cool what you just mentioned. I hadn't thought about before, where your intervention, where we have, and most of the time, most of the performance issues that I have found is where the developer is not so skilled, and what I mean, I cannot put a connection inside of a for loop. Why not? and it's something that if you, as a performance engineer, I mean, and it's a back and forth. You can, when you put these thresholds or limitations, like, hey, your software should not be doing that many connections, and you should test it. You should have telemetry implemented, or at least put some instrumentation in your code. These little things. And the developer, I know at times, for as a developer, and I was in a former life a developer, all you want to do is to get that freaking function to work and deliver, and so that your boss won't fire you. But at the same time, you kind of start learning some of those standards. So if the developer is at a novice level, or starting, or even, I know some that are really, really good pros in what they do, but the performance side is not like, why should I care about memory? I have this awesome, almost AI function that, but with that single function, you're draining the CPU. Sorry, you should be a little bit more mindful about those things. And vice versa, as you say, when we work as performance engineers with developers, we absorb some of those things and understand. I mean, each camp will never get at the level of the other. As you say, there are some developing things that I'm like, you did that what with a what? I know performance, and that's what I
cool.
can't.
Let's see if it goes. Let's see if it scales. All right. Yeah. I wonder if there's another thing on Leandro as well, as in, when you're running at scale, I'll say something very low, or you're doing studying performance in production, hundreds or maybe thousands of hits per second or calls per second, and very large resource pools being consumed over time, elasticity, all this kind of stuff. That kind of goes away. Those observations go away when you're in development, and the decisions to fix something, change something, release or not release could be the big question on the pipeline. The data that you need to make those decisions is different from the data from production. And one of the great examples of this, and a shout out to our friend Andreas Grabner, from Dynatrace, is that classic N+1 problem. And N+1 is when you query the database, and then you go through and you sort through all of your return rows, and you have to get N+1 on all of these an N+1 database calls, and you're making round trips to the database to get all the rest of the data, versus making one round trip and collecting one large data set, and then efficiently doing that processing in memory with CPU in the app layer, which you probably have plenty of memory to do that. So take an N+1 problem. When we see it in production, the first thing you might see is database latency, or queuing in the app tier because it's waiting for all these calls. You might see CPU or connection thrashing, and maybe you might see database calls per second go up, which may result in more CPU, depending on the call. In the app layer itself, that's how you might observe this. In development, N+1 may just be the change from making 1 or 2 calls to the database to making 10 calls to the database, because you don't have a lot of data in production. An N+1 problem in production might be going from 2 calls to 200,000 calls in production because you have data volume. So this is something that I definitely had to learn shifting left and working and doing performance and development. It is almost like static analysis on what kind of a metric would make a developer, make them grow interest. Oh, wait a minute. Well, that changed. And that brings me to this other point about, we talk a lot about trending and doing small load tests, maybe at the unit or component level. Maybe it's just after the QA regression on a nightly basis. However you do it, but do it frequently throughout the course of your sprint. Because it'll be that Wednesday afternoon when suddenly you see the graph and you can throw a little alert. Maybe your tool can have some auto baselining or something in there that says, wow, the number of database connections went by 1,000% more on this build versus the build this morning or last night. So just looking for something that changes when the faster you hurl code changes into the code base, you miss something. There's a pull request gets missed, or everyone has opinions on pull requests, but we'll miss things within the ordering and sequencing and the pattern. So I thought that might be something interesting, even in the K6 world, that you're encountering and thinking about. How does my tool work differently for those kinds of metrics and those kinds of alerts or thresholds in the results versus what I'll say is classic load testing, large scale, large throughput, resource usage? Is there a difference in what you're seeing?
As you're saying, the big ass load tests, and just that fine line in between, is this just synthetics, just pinging the processes, or doing mini load tests frequently? As you say, I want those to have in my system happening to alert me and tell me if anything happens, if anything goes haywire. And on all that, I think, and departing from the point where we get those pains having to keep up with those automations. I know now that we live in a service tiered world. It's gotten kind of easier, but still, it would be better, I would say, and something that I've seen that is kind of aimed at by tools like K6 is, and I managed to do something like that with JMeter. Hey, developer, you just created this, create the request for the service. If it has a dependency, please work it out, have it ready, put it in the repository. Because when that big ass load test has to happen, as you say, there are some things on the expertise that us performance testers, maybe the few ones that know or can give those insights, and to simulate quickly and to analyze that information. Hey, we're having a problem. Can we do a big ass load test in pre-production? Sure, let me pull all these resources that the developers already created, create a load test, because we already have instrumentation, we already have good metrics, we know the utilization, we know exactly what to simulate from that situation that you mentioned, that is this possible problem. If we already, for us, it becomes more or less drag and drop, assemble a good scenario, which is where maybe the developer should not get too much into, and we can simulate and analyze that information. So it helps everyone. We can detect those issues faster. Or as you say, when the developer creates these performance automations, K6 style, and puts them on a repository that our Rundeck or our Jenkins or whatever you're using continuously is executing, as soon as something starts to go weird, we will know or whoever has to be notified. So there are several benefits enabling them, I think, all over the place.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned Postman earlier, like just getting Postman to run a little load test. You can do it with JMeter, any of the smaller tools do that very well. I was going to give a shout out to Amber Race, Amber Tests on Twitter. and she gives one of the best workshops on how to use Postman to do load testing. And I think this week there was the other webinar. I think I saw it fly by in the social media, was somebody Postman and load testing, which you could totally do. I wouldn't call it like elaborate, orchestrated, giant, big ass load testing. Excuse me, but you could go there. I mean, if you can get JMeter running on a giant set of Java VMs,
I've seen
10,000 hits per second. Yeah,
those type of things with CURLs, just some curls in your command line, and you're generating some sort of synthetic or mini load test that you can put a thread in there and quickly hit it, and you'll be good.
Yeah, this is another good tip as well. It doesn't take much, I think, is the tip. The advice would be if you're testing at a component level, and maybe if you're involved in a code review, just what's coming down the pipeline, reviewing the stories or what the developers are working on. Maybe you're like, well, we can set in just 10 concurrent using rendezvous or the synchronizing threads or whatever naming your tool has to sort of synchronize the arrival rate. I think it's mysteriously underutilized in the development phase, because that's where you really we're going with a microscope, and that little thing you just changed on this build, let's hit that.
And someone may tell you, well, it's just taking 0.4 seconds. Yeah, but it was taking 0.04 from before.
0.04 before.
It's 10 times slower. It may not seem significant to you right now, but for me, it's a red light. It's like this Titanic's going to sink. That is your 10 times iceberg that is going to hit it. So that is a big advantage for when the developer finishes something, even as you say, 10 threads, 5 threads, slam it at once, see what happens, and compare to the last one you did that tiny slam, which takes you under a minute. And how many times have we encountered this thing that we have to already automate is near production, and the performance sucks. Why no one else noticed this or reported this? It's so awful.
Yeah. I know we've both been in this situation, and I've mentored and helped people in this situation before when that, why didn't we catch this kind of mentality comes out, which is, I think, fear-based, or it's sort of, aren't I going to be held accountable for something anomalous or something we didn't think about? And there's no such thing as perfect software. There's no perfect product in the world. And there are people out there right now making great productivity and millions of dollars and happy customers with some of the crappiest code you've ever seen in your life. But you know what? It's working good enough. And so I do believe there's contexts where good enough software approach works, good enough performance works very, very well. I just don't find in that overreaction, the further you are away from production, overreactions, when you say it's twice as slow, you need to know what comes after. Well, it's 10 times slower in development. Something happened. There's an N+1 problem. Something changed in what we're observing in development. And your job as a performance engineer is no longer just gatekeeping, stop the bugs from going to production. It's more like, well, let's analyze what are the characteristics of our observation, and is that something that could get worse with more data? It could get worse if we had more users. It could get worse if we had higher network latency, maybe microservices calls. And really honing your mind on, I see what I see, but what would happen if these resources were slower or we had more data or something? And then you could advise your developer team, I think this one needs to be fixed because, I think this is what could happen. And if you don't have a pre-prod, if you don't have a bigger environment to go test it, well, then that begs the question, if you have an intelligent conversation or at least a concerted effort to talk with your engineers, they'll get interested. Hey, well, you talk about network latency. Can we test? Well, here's some tools. We can inject latency in the service layer of this. We could impair the actual physical network. Oh, okay. Well, I think we need to test this with a couple million rows of data and not just 100 rows of data. all right, how do we do that? And will we blow out the sprint timelines? And how big a risk? So be prepared to not just be a gatekeeper in development. You're more of a facilitator of how are we attending to risk? And I see
would
that all
say
over the place, but in development for sure.
What we have to become are those facilitators, not the gatekeeper, but facilitators of self gatekeeping measurements, so that every person that is inserting or creating or contributing has some principles or pays attention, or even if you pair it with, hey, when you create something like a service, can you create a quick automation, a quick JMeter call, a quick K6 or even CURL request that we can eventually integrate in the pipeline or in our load tests? And as you say, okay, hey, I am always checking my dashboard for some deviation in performance. I just noticed that you are creating something that takes 10 times, twice as long.
Yeah.
What is it about? And it could be, as you say, we just need to do a little larger concurrent test to make sure there's no problem, or a big load test just for that component. Let's see what happens. Or if they tell you there won't be much problem if we put it into production as it is. Okay, can we put something to roll it back quickly just in case? So some of those mechanisms and talks will save so much tears, blood, and suffering in those situations, which
it's true.
We all have lived.
It's true. Yeah. Awesome. All right.
Okay.
Well, we're getting a little long for our small perf bit times 2, but there's 2 of us, so obviously you get a little more time.
It adds up.
But I'll give my thanks to my architects team at FreedomPay for, one, initiating the conversation with me and saying, hey, we want to learn about your world. And number 2, contributing such good questions and interests. And I'm always throwing out, well, guys, this is what we kind of want to do and where we're going. Does that work for you? And so thanks to Zach and Steve-O and James and Daniel and John, I think whoever these people were really great. It's nice to see them. So yeah, that's my thanks for the week.
My closing thanks. I also want to give a great thank to Tristan Lombard. They had a group, book club for testing books, and I got nominated for a review. I'm going to be helping them, and book clubs. I mean, wow, there's a book club. I want.
Yes.
How can I join?
So, are you allowed to join on your own?
Well, this may be a spoiler, but we may have a cameo in that episode of the author.
There you go. Now you're supposed to go on like a book tour and do like book signings and things.
That as soon as pandemic-wise we're ready, I think I'm going to try something like that. It will be really cool. There's so many people saying like, hey, I need this signed. Do you accept DocuSign?
Exactly. But congratulations on that. And Thanks. There are some events coming up here this year that I think we will be together at, which would be really, really cool. So, Leandro, thanks for joining me on a weekly PerfBits. It was really nice, and it's nice to see your face. Even though it's not there. It's not there. It's there. Exactly. Thank you. Ow. That's the wrong year. But again, shout out to our sponsors, Ryan Falk Consulting, Tricentis, Neoload, and Flood, and as well, Catchpoint APM. Thank you guys very much for your support and supporting the community. This is great. Leandro?
Happy Friday, everyone.
Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. I'm going to try to do like a thing here with click the thing, and it's like an outro.
Okay. Outro. Adios.
Ciao.